"You don't belong here," my mother-in-law said. Her voice didn't echo loudly through the church hall, but it was sharp enough that people nearby turned their heads. I froze for a moment, my hand still on the wooden pew, my daughter sitting right beside me in her pale yellow dress. I smiled. A small, deliberate smile, not out of amusement, but because I refused to give her the satisfaction of seeing me break. The organ was still playing softly, and the sunlight filtered through the stained glass windows, painting the aisle with shades of blue and crimson. It should have been a peaceful Sunday morning. Families around us were whispering to their children, flipping through hymnals, preparing for the next song. But her words cut through all of it. My heart thudded against my ribs like a warning drum. I did not answer. Instead, I straightened my back, folded my hands over my lap, and looked forward at the cross above the altar. My silence was my shield. Outwardly calm, inwardly trembling. My palms grew damp, the kind of sweat you can't hide even in a cool sanctuary. I could feel the gaze of strangers sliding toward me, then away, uncomfortable at witnessing something that wasn't supposed to happen inside a church. I wanted to whisper back, to ask her what gave her the right to decide where I belonged, but I bit my tongue. My daughter leaned closer, pressing her shoulder into mine as if to say, "Don't move, just stay." Her tiny hand clutched mine, and that alone steadied me. My husband sat 2 rows ahead, oblivious. He had gone up earlier to greet an elder he admired, leaving me and our child to slide into a side pew near his mother. Of all the benches in the church, it had to be this one. His mother's eyes flicked toward me with quiet triumph, like she had been waiting for the chance to deliver that line. I remembered the first time I stepped into this church years ago. The choir was rehearsing Amazing Grace, and I had felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the air. I thought it would be a place of welcome, a second family. Today, the warmth felt like fire under my skin. Her words replayed in my head. "You don't belong here. Not in this church, not in this family, not in her son's life." She wanted me to feel small enough to slip out of the pew and vanish. I closed my eyes for half a breath. I pictured the stained glass, the colors bleeding across the aisle. I pictured the hymn numbers pinned neatly on the wooden board. I reminded myself that I had as much right to be here as anyone. When I opened my eyes, my smile was still there, calm, controlled. But inside, a storm gathered. The usher passed by with the collection plate. He didn't notice anything unusual. I placed a folded bill inside, steadying my hand so it wouldn't shake. My mother-in-law sniffed, a sharp inhale that sounded almost like disapproval of the amount. She didn't speak again, but the damage had already been done. My breathing slowed. I forced each inhale to be measured, each exhale to be quiet. That was how I kept from trembling. My daughter hummed softly, distracted by the colored lights on the floor. Innocent. Unaware that her grandmother had just drawn a line in stone between us. I thought of leaving, standing up, taking my child's hand, and walking out of the building. But if I left, she would win. She would tell everyone afterward, "See? She couldn't even stay. She doesn't belong." So I stayed. I stayed with my back straight and my smile sharp as glass. The pastor began his sermon, talking about forgiveness and unity, words that now rang bitter in my ears. My mother-in-law nodded at every line like she owned the message. My jaw tightened. She was daring me to react, daring me to cause a scene. I didn't. Not yet. Instead, I let the silence stretch between us. Silence has weight, sometimes heavier than shouting. She shifted slightly in her seat, perhaps expecting me to whisper something back. When I didn't, her lips pressed into a thin line. I thought of all the times she had done this before. The Christmas dinner, when she set an extra chair for a neighbor but not for me. The birthday party, when she introduced me as the babysitter instead of her son's wife. The hospital visit, when she told the nurse she was the child's mother, leaving me standing in the hallway. Each slight was a stone, and together they built the wall she wanted between me and the family. But that morning at church, something cracked inside me. The stained glass light hit my daughter's hair, making it glow like a halo. And I thought, if I stay silent forever, she will grow up thinking this is normal, that a woman can be told she doesn't belong in her own family and should just smile and stay quiet. I couldn't let that be her lesson. So I smiled again, wider this time, and leaned slightly forward as if in prayer. Inside, I was planning, step by step, word by word. I knew the microphone was only a few feet away. I knew the pastor often invited people to share brief words of gratitude at the end of service. And I knew that if I spoke in that moment, the entire congregation would hear me, not just her, not just my husband, everyone. The thought made my pulse race, but it also steadied my resolve. Her whisper had been a weapon. Mine would be a mirror. I rubbed my daughter's knuckles gently, letting her know I was calm, that everything was fine. She smiled up at me, trusting, innocent. She didn't need to know the storm swirling inside me. The sermon moved on. My mother-in-law glanced at me once more, clearly expecting defeat, but she didn't know what was already set in motion. She thought she had silenced me. She thought she had claimed the space. She thought her words would echo longer than mine. She was wrong, because when the final hymn ended and the pastor invited anyone who wished to speak, I rose slowly to my feet. The wooden pew creaked softly under me. My daughter's hand slipped into mine. My smile never faltered. I stepped forward, each stride echoing in the silent church. And as I reached the front, I felt dozens of eyes following me. Eyes that had witnessed her words. Eyes that were about to witness mine. She didn't know yet. She didn't realize what was coming. But I did. And that was enough to keep me steady as I faced the microphone. The invitation came on a Thursday evening. My husband walked into the kitchen holding his phone, reading a text aloud. Mom says we should all come to service this Sunday. She says Pastor Allen will be speaking about family. He sounded almost cheerful, like this was some kind of olive branch. I looked up from the sink, hands still wet from rinsing dishes, and forced a smile. A part of me wanted to believe her, that maybe she was reaching out, that maybe she was ready to let go of whatever resentment had been brewing for years. But another part of me, the larger part, felt that familiar knot in my stomach, the one that always came before family gatherings. I dried my hands on a towel and nodded. Of course. We'll go. My voice was calm, steady. Inside, doubts whispered like an echo in a hollow room. Friday evening, I laid out clothes for my daughter. A soft yellow dress with tiny white flowers printed on the fabric. She twirled in it, giggling, asking if she looked like sunshine. I told her she looked brighter than the windows in our house on a summer morning. She laughed and asked if Grandma would like it. That question sat heavy in my chest. I wanted to say yes. I wanted to tell her that her grandmother would smile and call her beautiful, but I couldn't promise what I knew wasn't true. Instead, I kissed her forehead and told her she would shine no matter what anyone said. Saturday night, I barely slept. I lay awake, listening to the hum of the ceiling fan, the occasional car passing outside, the sound of my husband's breathing. He was relaxed, unbothered. Meanwhile, my mind replayed old scenes. I saw Christmas dinner 3 years ago, when she served everyone at the table and then placed a single bread roll in front of me with a sweet smile, saying she had almost forgotten. The room had laughed nervously, and I had laughed too, because what else could I do? I remembered Easter brunch when she announced loudly that my cooking was not the way our family does things. She waved a fork like a judge's gavel, and no one defended me. I had excused myself to the bathroom, locked the door, and counted to 60 until my heart stopped racing. I thought about the day my daughter was born. In the hospital room, my mother-in-law had told the nurse she was the baby's mother. I had been groggy from exhaustion, unable to fight, but I heard it. The nurse corrected her, but the damage was carved into my memory. Those were the moments that built the wall between us, brick by brick. And still, I kept trying. Sunday morning came with a pale sky, streaks of gray clouds, and a chill in the air. I dressed carefully. A modest navy dress, a pair of flats, hair pulled back neatly. No reason for anyone to say I looked out of place. I packed my daughter's cardigan in my purse just in case the sanctuary was cold. On the drive there, I watched the trees pass by, their branches bare, reaching up like hands. My husband hummed along with the radio. My daughter sang softly in the back seat, hugging her little stuffed rabbit. Everything looked ordinary, but the knot in my stomach grew tighter with each mile. We pulled into the church parking lot, cars lined up, people greeting each other warmly, shaking hands, sharing smiles. I took a deep breath before stepping out. The air smelled faintly of damp leaves and coffee from the fellowship hall. I held my daughter's hand and walked toward the entrance. Inside, the familiar scent of polished wood and candle wax wrapped around us. The stained glass windows glowed with morning light, painting the floor in colors that shifted with every step. The choir was practicing softly, voices rising and falling like waves. Everything looked the same, yet I felt eyes on me. I always did in that place. A quick glance here, a whisper there, as if my presence was a footnote in their carefully written story. I told myself it was paranoia, that maybe they were just curious, but deep down I knew better. We found a pew near the middle, but my mother-in-law was already seated there. She shifted slightly, making space but not enough, forcing me and my daughter to squeeze in at the edge. Her perfume, heavy and floral, hung in the air like a wall between us. She didn't greet me. She greeted my husband, warmly, calling him her sweet boy, then patted my daughter's cheek. For me, just a quick glance, sharp as glass. I smoothed my dress over my knees and tried to focus on the service. The choir sang the opening hymn. The congregation rose together, voices filling the room. I sang quietly, my voice trembling. My daughter swayed to the melody, innocent and unaware. The pastor spoke about unity, about love that binds families stronger than blood. His words sounded like they were meant for me, though he didn't know it. I glanced at my mother-in-law. She nodded piously, lips moving in agreement with every phrase. I wanted to laugh at the irony. I had come here hoping maybe, just maybe, things would be different. That we could sit together in peace, that she might look at me without that glint of disdain. I told myself not to expect too much. But hope is stubborn. It clings, even when reason tells you to let go. As I sat there, hands folded, I felt the knot in my stomach shift into something sharper. A premonition, almost. Like standing at the edge of a storm before the first strike of lightning. I didn't know what form it would take, but I knew something was coming. The usher walked past with the collection plate. I had prepared a folded bill in advance, slipping it in with steady fingers. My mother-in-law sighed quietly, a sound meant to be heard. My cheeks warmed, but I kept my face forward. My daughter leaned against me, whispering, "Mommy, are we okay?" I kissed the top of her head and said yes. She smiled and went back to watching the choir. I wanted to believe my own words, but deep inside, I knew better. This wasn't just another Sunday. It was a stage, and she had been waiting for the curtain to rise. And I was right. The words were still hanging in the air when I turned my head and saw the look on my daughter's face. She was too young to fully understand, but old enough to sense that something wasn't right. Her brows furrowed slightly, her small lips pressed together, and she clutched her little stuffed rabbit tighter against her chest. That sight cut me deeper than the words themselves. I wanted to shield her, to block her ears, to pretend that the moment had never happened, but the damage was already there. Children remember more than we think. I inhaled slowly, the scent of candle wax filling my nose, mingling with the faint perfume of lilies placed near the altar. Around us, the congregation kept whispering. Some people tried to look away, embarrassed to witness a family fracture inside a sanctuary. Others watched openly, curious, eyes flicking back and forth between me and my mother-in-law, as if waiting for the next move in a game. My mother-in-law sat tall, shoulders squared, her pearl earrings catching the colored light from the stained glass windows. Her expression was smug, as if she had just won a round. I could feel her satisfaction radiating like heat. "Did you hear me?" she murmured again, low but sharp, as though daring me to respond. I turned my head, met her eyes, and for the first time I didn't look away. My smile widened, just enough to unsettle her. "Yes, I heard you," I whispered back. My voice was calm, steady, but my chest was pounding. Her lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Good," she said. Then she turned her head toward the pulpit, pretending to focus on the pastor as if the conversation was finished. But it wasn't finished. Not for me. My daughter tugged at my sleeve and whispered, "Mommy, why did Grandma say that?" The innocence in her voice nearly broke me. I squeezed her hand and told her we'd talk later. For now, just listen to the music. The choir began another hymn. Their voices rose in harmony, singing of love and mercy, words that contrasted painfully with the tension sitting like a stone in my chest. I remembered another time, years ago, when she had embarrassed me publicly. At our wedding reception, she gave a toast. Everyone clinked glasses, waiting for words of blessing. Instead, she smiled sweetly and said, "I hope my son always remembers where he comes from, even when some people try to pull him away." The guests laughed uncomfortably, and I forced a smile while my cheeks burned. Or the day of our son's baptism. She insisted on holding him throughout the ceremony, presenting herself as the central figure. When the pastor asked me to step forward, she kept her grip, whispering, "Stand back. This is my role." My husband, caught between us, hesitated before gently prying the baby from her arms. The photographs from that day show her smiling broadly, me standing awkwardly to the side, half erased from my own child's memory. The patterns were always there. Subtle enough to dismiss as misunderstandings, sharp enough to wound. And each time, I had told myself to let it go for the sake of peace. But this time felt different. Because this time, my daughter heard it. I looked at the cross above the altar, its gold edges glowing in the morning light. The pastor's voice floated over the congregation, talking about forgiveness and grace. My mind was far away, replaying every time I had been pushed aside. The Thanksgiving dinner, when she served everyone pumpkin pie except me, saying, "I wasn't sure you'd like it." The 4th of July barbecue, when she introduced me to neighbors as the babysitter. The hospital visit, when she told the nurse she was the child's mother. All those memories stacked one on top of another until they formed a tower of resentment that I could no longer ignore. I glanced around the sanctuary. Children fidgeting in their Sunday clothes. Old men adjusting their ties. Women flipping through hymnals. Everything looked normal. But under the surface, a storm was brewing in me. I leaned closer to my mother-in-law, just enough for her to hear. "One day," I said softly, "you'll regret saying that in this place." "Oh?" Her head snapped toward me, eyes narrowing. "Is that a threat?" "It's a promise," I replied. She scoffed quietly, then looked away again. But for the first time, I saw a flicker of uncertainty cross her face. The hymn ended. Applause followed, polite and warm. My daughter clapped along, smiling, her earlier confusion momentarily forgotten. I envied her ability to move on so quickly, to live in the moment, but I couldn't move on. Not this time. The pastor invited the congregation to bow their heads for prayer. I did, folding my hands, but my mind was not on the words. My mind was already drafting what I would do when the chance came. Because I knew the service would end the way it always did, with the pastor offering the microphone to anyone who wished to share a word. My mother-in-law had chosen this place to humiliate me, but I would use the same stage to show everyone who I truly was. When the prayer ended, and we lifted our heads, my mother-in-law gave me one last side glance, as if checking whether her words had landed. I smiled again, slow and deliberate. She didn't know that the battle she thought she had won was only beginning. The organ began the closing hymn. My husband finally returned to our pew, sliding in beside me, oblivious to what had just happened. He draped an arm around our daughter, kissed her hair, and smiled at his mother. She smiled back, radiant, as though nothing had happened. I sat still, silent, my body calm but my heart fierce, because the next move would be mine. The closing hymn faded, and a hush settled over the sanctuary. I could hear the soft shuffle of feet as people prepared for the benediction. My heart pounded so loudly it almost drowned out the organ's final notes. I knew what was coming. At the end of every service, Pastor Allen always offered the microphone to anyone who wanted to share. It was tradition. My mother-in-law had probably counted on that too. She thought I would stay quiet, that her words would remain unchallenged. She didn't know me as well as she thought. The pastor cleared his throat and smiled warmly at the congregation. "Before we close today, is there anyone who would like to share a testimony, a word of gratitude, or a prayer request?" His voice echoed gently against the wooden beams above, reverent and inviting. I felt my daughter's hand slip into mine, her little fingers curled tight. I squeezed back, giving her a reassuring smile. She didn't know what I was about to do, but she sensed it was important. I rose slowly from the pew. The old wood creaked under my weight, drawing the eyes of those around me. My knees trembled, but I steadied myself, shoulders back, chin high. The stained glass windows cast patches of ruby and sapphire light across my dress as I stepped into the aisle. A few whispers rippled through the crowd. Some faces turned with polite curiosity. Others frowned, wondering what I could possibly have to say. My husband looked startled, his brows lifting as if to ask silently, "What are you doing?" My mother-in-law, though, went pale. She shifted in her seat, lips pressed tight, her hands gripping the edge of the pew. I walked forward, each step deliberate. My heels clicked softly on the stone floor. The sanctuary smelled of old hymnals and beeswax candles. The air was cool against my skin, but my face burned with determination. When I reached the front, the pastor smiled and extended the microphone. I took it, my hand steady despite the storm inside me. I turned to face the congregation. Rows of familiar faces stared back, expectant, some kind, some skeptical. My eyes lingered for a brief second on my mother-in-law. She sat stiff, her pearls gleaming, her eyes sharp and watchful. I inhaled, then spoke. My voice was clear, louder than I expected. "This morning, I was told I don't belong here." Gasps rippled through the room. People shifted in their seats, exchanging uneasy glances. I let the silence stretch for a heartbeat, heavy and undeniable. I continued. "But the truth is, no one can tell you where you do or don't belong when it comes to faith, when it comes to family, when it comes to love." My words hung in the air, steady and resolute. I felt my pulse hammering in my throat, but I refused to waver. My gaze swept across the room, catching the faces of people who had known me for years, some of whom had quietly ignored the slights, the whispered comments, the exclusions. They were listening now. I went on. "I have sat in this pew Sunday after Sunday, smiling, staying quiet, believing that one day respect would come. But silence can also be mistaken for weakness. And today, I choose not to be silent." My daughter squeezed my hand from the aisle, her eyes wide and shining. That gave me strength. The pastor shifted slightly, looking uncomfortable but not interrupting. He seemed torn between protecting the sanctity of the service and recognizing the weight of what was being said. I looked directly at my mother-in-law then. "You said I don't belong here, but I do. This is my family's church as much as it is yours, and I will not let anyone—" I paused, letting the word land, "anyone— tell my child that her mother is not welcome." A murmur swept through the congregation. Some heads nodded. Others bowed, avoiding my gaze. But the message was clear. I had claimed my place. My body trembled, not from fear, but from release, as if years of swallowed words were finally breaking free. My chest rose and fell quickly, my breath sharp, but my voice never cracked. My mother-in-law's face flushed crimson. She shook her head, whispering something to the woman beside her. But the damage was done. The crowd had seen, they had heard. She could not erase the words. I finished with a steady tone. "Belonging is not granted by one person's approval. Belonging is lived, and I belong here." With that, I handed the microphone back to the pastor. His expression was unreadable, but he nodded slowly, almost respectfully. The sanctuary was silent for a long moment. Then a smattering of applause broke out, hesitant at first, then stronger as more people joined. My knees felt weak, but my heart surged with something fierce and undeniable. I turned, walked back to my pew, and sat down. My husband stared at me, stunned, his mouth slightly open. My daughter beamed, her small hand clutching mine like it was the safest thing in the world. My mother-in-law didn't clap. She didn't move. She sat rigid, her jaw tight, eyes burning with fury, but she had lost control of the narrative. For once, I wasn't the one shrinking in the corner. I had stood in the light, spoken the truth, and let the church hear it. And there was no taking it back. The moment I sat back down, I felt the weight of the church pressing in on me. 1,000 eyes, 1,000 judgments, but also something else: curiosity, maybe even respect. My hands trembled slightly as I smoothed my skirt. My daughter leaned into me, smiling like she had just watched a superhero movie. That smile alone was worth everything. But the silence didn't last. My mother-in-law shot to her feet, the pearls around her neck rattling as she turned toward the congregation. "This is outrageous," she snapped. Her voice, usually so controlled and sweet when she wanted to charm, was sharp and raw now. She twisted my words. "I never said she wasn't welcome here. I only meant—" "You said exactly that," I interrupted, my voice calm but cutting. You told me, in front of everyone, that I don't belong here. Gasps spread through the pews. People turned, whispering. The tension thickened like smoke. She glared at me, her face red. You're trying to humiliate me, in front of my own community. After everything I've done for this family. I kept my tone steady. Respect isn't measured by what you claim to have done. It's measured by how you treat people, and you've treated me like a stranger since the day I married your son. Her hands shook as she pointed a finger at me. You don't understand. You never understood our traditions, our way of life. You don't fit. You never did. I could feel my heart racing, but I refused to flinch. Then why am I still here? Why am I raising your grandchildren, loving your son, supporting this family in ways no one ever acknowledged? If that's not belonging, then what is? The congregation stirred. Some nodded quietly, their eyes sympathetic. Others looked down, unwilling to take sides. My husband finally stood, his face pale, torn between us. Mom, he said softly, please sit down. But she wouldn't. Her voice rose higher. No, they need to know the truth. She has poisoned this family, turned you against me, and now she wants to turn this entire church against me too. I looked her straight in the eye. The only truth that matters is that you tried to erase me, over and over again, but I'm still standing, and I'm not afraid anymore. Her breath came fast, ragged. How dare you speak to me this way? I tilted my head, my voice calm as ice. How dare you speak to me the way you did in front of my child? The crowd hushed again. Even the pastor looked uncertain about stepping in. It wasn't every Sunday that the sanctuary turned into a battlefield. My mother-in-law tried again, her words tumbling out in a frenzy. I gave everything to this family, my son, my time, my sacrifices. And what did I get? Disrespect from the very woman who should be grateful. I leaned forward slightly. Grateful? For being belittled at every holiday? For being erased from family photos? For watching you introduce me as the babysitter of my own children? If gratitude means swallowing insults, then you can keep it. Murmurs spread again. A few people clapped softly, quickly stopping themselves, unsure if it was allowed. Her eyes darted around the room, searching for support. She spotted her friend Marjorie in the second row and pleaded, You know me. You know I would never be cruel. Marjorie shifted uncomfortably. I've seen some things, she admitted carefully. And maybe it's time you let her be. The words hit harder than I expected. My mother-in-law's jaw dropped. For once, someone outside the family had acknowledged what I had endured. She turned back to me, desperation flashing in her eyes. You'll regret this, she hissed. You're tearing this family apart. I stood now, facing her directly, my voice steady enough to carry across the hall. I'm refusing to let you tear me apart. There's a difference. The crowd erupted in whispers. My husband moved quickly to stand between us, his hands raised, his voice trembling. Enough, both of you. But she wasn't finished. She stepped closer, her finger jabbing the air. If you think this is over, you're wrong. You've made a fool of me in front of everyone. I will never forgive you. I straightened my shoulders, refusing to step back. You don't have to forgive me. You just have to stop underestimating me. The words landed like a stone in still water, sending ripples through the room. My mother-in-law's face twisted, her lips trembling. For a moment, I thought she might strike me. Instead, she let out a sharp, broken laugh. Then, in a sudden burst of fury, she grabbed her purse and stormed down the aisle. The sanctuary doors slammed shut behind her, the sound echoing like thunder. For a few seconds, the church was silent again. All eyes turned back to me. My knees wobbled, but I remained standing, my daughter clutching my hand tightly. The pastor finally spoke, his tone cautious but gentle. Sometimes truth comes in difficult forms. Let us take a moment of silence. Heads bowed, I closed my eyes, letting the silence wash over me. My heart still hammered, my hands still tingled, but I felt lighter. I had stood my ground. When the prayer ended, people began filing out. Some stopped by my pew. A woman I barely knew squeezed my hand and whispered, "You were brave." An older man nodded and said, "It needed to be said." My husband looked torn, caught between his loyalty to his mother and his shock at what had unfolded. But he didn't scold me. He didn't say a word. He just looked at me, eyes wide, searching, as though seeing me clearly for the first time. And my daughter. She wrapped her arms around me and whispered, "Mommy, you were strong." That was all the confirmation I needed. I sat back down on the pew, breathing deeply, knowing the storm wasn't over. My mother-in-law would strike again. She always did. But this time, things had changed. This time, the entire church had seen the battle. And for the first time, she had walked away, defeated. The slam of the sanctuary doors echoed in my mind long after the service ended. Even as people filed out, murmuring in small clusters, I felt the vibration of that sound in my chest. My mother-in-law had walked out defeated, but I knew her silence wouldn't last forever. That afternoon at home, the house was unusually quiet. My husband sat at the kitchen table, his hands wrapped around a mug of coffee, gone cold. He looked at me like he was trying to put together a puzzle. My daughter colored in her sketchbook at the counter, humming to herself, blissfully calm after such a stormy morning. Finally, my husband broke the silence. "You didn't have to do that." In front of everyone. His tone wasn't angry, but heavy, uncertain. I set a plate of fruit on the table and sat across from him. If I didn't, she would have kept going, and our daughter would grow up thinking it's normal to be told she doesn't belong in her own family. And his eyes softened, but his voice was quiet. "You humiliated her." "She humiliated me for years," I replied. "The difference is, this time everyone saw it happen." He looked away, conflicted. I could tell part of him wanted to defend her, the woman who had raised him, but another part of him had seen the truth with his own eyes. He had seen me stand tall while his mother crumbled. That evening, my phone buzzed with messages. Some from friends who had been in the congregation, some from numbers I didn't even recognize. Words like proud, brave, and finally appeared over and over. People had noticed more than I thought. But there was another message, too. From my mother-in-law, just 5 words. "You'll regret this. Watch yourself." I stared at the screen for a long moment, my stomach tightening. Then I turned the phone face down. I wouldn't let her words seep into me again. The next few days were tense. She didn't call my husband. She didn't stop by. For once, there was silence from her side. It almost felt like peace, except I knew it was only the eye of the storm. By the following Sunday, whispers had spread through the congregation. When I walked into church, people greeted me more warmly than before. Some women touched my arm and whispered, "Good for you." An older gentleman nodded at me with quiet respect. Even Pastor Allen paused, shook my hand, and said softly, "The truth has a way of surfacing." Imo. My mother-in-law did not appear that Sunday. Her absence was as loud as her accusations had been the week before. At home, I began to feel lighter. For years, I had carried the weight of her disapproval like a heavy cloak. Now, it had slipped off my shoulders. I realized something important. Her power only existed because I allowed her silence to go unchallenged. One evening, I took my daughter to a salon. She sat in the chair, swinging her legs, while the stylist trimmed her hair into soft curls. She beamed at her reflection, proud and happy. As I watched her, I thought, this is what she'll remember, not her grandmother's bitterness, but her mother's strength. I found myself doing things differently, too. I no longer held back my voice at family dinners. I laughed louder, spoke clearly, took up space without apologizing. I stopped waiting for permission to belong. Of course, my mother-in-law eventually resurfaced. She showed up at our door one evening, clutching a pie in her hands, her face a mask of politeness. She tried to act as if nothing had happened, as if she hadn't thrown me to the wolves in front of an entire church. I opened the door, but I didn't step aside. "What do you want?" My voice was even, firm. Her smile tightened. "I thought I'd bring something for the family." "We don't need it," I said calmly. "We're doing just fine." Oven. For the first time, she seemed unsure of herself. Her eyes flickered past me to where my daughter was playing in the living room. Then she looked back at me. "You think you won, don't you?" I met her gaze. This was never about winning. It was about not letting you erase me anymore. Her lips pressed together, but she said nothing. She turned, walked down the steps, and drove away. I closed the door and leaned against it, my chest rising and falling with relief. The war might not be over, But the battle had shifted. She could no longer pretend I was invisible. Weeks passed. Life settled into a new rhythm. My daughter thrived, happier and more confident. My husband grew quieter, more thoughtful. He struggled with the shift in loyalty, but I could see him starting to understand. Slowly, he began to defend me when small comments slipped out in conversations with relatives. Slowly, he began to see the woman he had married, not the caricature his mother had painted. And me? I discovered something powerful. I didn't need her approval. I never had. Belonging is not given by someone else's permission. Belonging is claimed by standing tall, by refusing to be erased, by loving yourself and those who truly love you. One night, as I tucked my daughter into bed, she whispered, "Mommy, I'm glad you didn't let Grandma be mean to you." Tears pricked my eyes. I kissed her forehead and said, "I'll never let anyone tell us we don't belong." I turned off the light, stood in the doorway, and let those words settle in my heart. Because they were true. I had found my voice, and there was no going back.